iHeartRadio podcast. Chris Harrison and Lauren Zima coming to you from the home office in Austin, Texas on a very special Father's Day edition of the most dramatic podcast ever. And this is an important podcast I wanted to do today because there are these weeks of the year, well, really all holidays, that hit differently for different people. Mother's Day, Father's Day among them, because unfortunately, not everybody has their mom and dad with them. And this is a perspective that I have really gained thanks to my first guest today, Lauren Zima.
Oh, wow. Did you have a guest? Oh,
well,
wow.
I mean, really, I have two very special guests today. One of them is you, and then another is a Dr. Chris Taylor, who is, has 20 years of experience in therapy and in especially 20 years experience in parent-teen expert. And helping families. And what I wanted to really dive into today, because you gave me this amazing perspective once we got married, was, Father's Day hits different. Your father, Gary Zima, an amazing dad to three beautiful children, is no longer with us. And so these days, these weeks are so different for you.
Yeah, I actually did a little video for Experience Camps where I volunteer about this weekend because we talk about it a lot in the grief community because, you see a Father's Day card display and that's like this little kind of mini punch to the gut, and years ago for me, it was a bigger punch to the gut. Like one thing that I do want to say, and it makes me excited to have this expert come on, is because I'm a little bit removed from like those first years. I mean, I lost my dad almost 15 years ago now. And from a positive perspective and not from a viewpoint of like forgetting about your person, I want to tell grieving people, it gets better. Time does help. But I think he'll be good to help remind us and give pointers for if you're like fresher into loss. And loss can also be, was your dad never in your life? Was that person, did you never know your dad? Because then Father's Day hurts in a different way. Or did your parents split up and maybe now you're estranged? Or there's all kinds of different loss and grief. And it does make these holidays hit a little bit. So I have my ways of dealing with it, which we can talk to with him about, but let's bring him on because I want to get into his expert opinions on all these different types of loss and how to navigate on holidays.
Chris Taylor, 20 years of experience, passionate about helping families. He's also an accomplished author, speaker, and he joins us now.
Chris, thanks for being with us. I feel like you might be the easiest guest name to remember we've ever had because we have my Chris here and his daughter's name is Taylor. So thank you for your convenience and your expertise.
Yeah, no, awesome. I always joke I've never met a Chris I didn't like. So,
well, it's weird how handsome we all are.
I feel like that's true. And I think we're like, 3/5 of the Avengers, something like that.
That's true. I always lose out to Hemsworth in the favorite Chris category.
I know. In those polls, they'll do like brackets and I love you, babe. But Hemsworth does usually beat you.
Yeah, and Pratt. But anyway, Chris, thank you for joining us on a very special Father's Day edition. And I wanted to kind of dive in with you and with my beautiful wife, Lauren, because she is really the one that's giving me perspective on this. My dad is still alive. We still get to talk. We're very close. We have a great relationship. So my Father's Day experience has always been the same. It's that traditional, Hallmark edition. But as Lauren has taught me, and I've learned even more, it's not like that for everybody. And so I wanted to bring you on to talk just about that there are very different, wild versions of Father's Day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Lauren, I'm sorry to hear about your father's death, obviously. And, you've had a lot of years to, sort of acclimate to that. But, absenteeism in fathers and abandonment and, so death is just one part of this sort of overall experience.
Yeah.
And, I think it's just giving people permission to experience all that it is and not sort of predefining. Because like you said, I think we all go in, it's like Father's Day, we're going to get that barbecue set. We're going to get the car wax kit, right?
Yeah.
But there's people out there that are like, I have no frame of reference for what even Father's Day is. And they just treat it like every other day. And then you layer on when you've had a dad and you've experienced death. I mean, that's just so painful because each year represents just time moving on and that lack of that presence in life. So
totally. And I was just saying, you probably couldn't hear before, Chris, but yeah, there's all sorts of different types of loss or people who never even had a father. And I think you just hit on something important, which is I find this, and I'd love your opinion on like what to say to people or how to explain this to people. But the problem is you become the bummer, right? Like if I'm not super happy on Father's Day, or if I'm like having a moment where I'm crying or missing my dad, then I'm bringing the mood down, and people like not only maybe feel uncomfortable, but they don't know what to do or say. And they sort of feel like you're killing the vibe. What's your advice to people on how they can help support, I guess, just first from an aspect maybe of people who have lost a father, but how they can support someone who for them Father's Day is maybe a bit of a grief moment, and or maybe even more so. Like it's gotten better for me over the years, but earlier on, God, I would see an advert, like a commercial for something for Father's Day, like Home Depot doing Father's Day, and that could potentially put me in tears.
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, one, I think it's giving space for human emotion. I mean, emotion, it makes people uncomfortable, right? And so I get it. You have this like joyous day for some people that are celebrating and excited to, to bask in, what that relationship has meant. But I think just talking about it with people, just being present in whatever they're experiencing, because if you let sort of that emotion linger, right, and it just kind of sits there, I think it does become this weight because it's uncomfortable. And it's like almost like, oh, you see that person over there in the corner, like their dad died. Don't talk to them. Like just, I hope they leave soon and get so uncomfortable. But it's like, why not just go up and be like, hey, it looks like you're having a hard time. Like, are you doing okay? Giving space to like share what they're experiencing, even if it's just a small story about their dad. It's interesting that this podcast came about because I was just talking to a couple of friends the other night. We had them over for dinner, and the wife was telling me the story about how year 3 was like the hardest for her.
Interesting.
And she said year 1 was like her dad was still with her. Like the memories were there. She still felt kind of fresh and in the relationship. Year 2 was kind of more of a grief year for her, just acknowledging the loss. And then she said the year 3 anniversary hit and it was like the bomb dropped. It was like time had moved on. He wasn't there. And I said, well, what did you really want people to do for you? Like, what were you experiencing that was, that was good and bad? And that's what she said. She said people just sort of like avoided her like a pariah. It was like they didn't want to talk about it. It was uncomfortable. Her family members were kind of like, well, you should be over this by now. It's like 3 years, right? And
right.
Like your family members said that. And then, we had talked about what she did when that first Father's Day came up. And she said she had a little ritual about it, right? She had her own little thing where she had his ashes in a box and she kind of just sat with him and had a little moment of sort of peace and communication with him and was able to move on. So, I think it's just being with people, and just kind of sitting in that emotion with them and not trying to say the right thing, not trying to fix it or make the emotion stop, but just letting them experience what they need to experience.
What do you think, babe?
Totally. Yeah, I think, and I also understand that a lot of people come at it from like a fear of hurting you more. They think if they bring this up, like then that's just gonna send you into a dark place and they don't want to put you in a dark place. But maybe that first question is like, hey, do you want to talk about this? Because if you do, I'm here for you. Or do you want to like, go ignore it? Do you want to go do something totally different? And that community, like I have a friend who just lost her dad suddenly and horribly. And I'm so proud of her. Like I've kind of talked to her and she's decided on Father's Day, she's going to get together with a group of people who she knows all have these dad issues, and they're going to go do something together and then kind of just create a whole outing together out of it. But yeah, there, I think making space for all the different complex things, because now that you're in my life, Chris Harrison, and Chris Taylor, I'm glad you're in our lives now too. But now that you're in my life, babe, like I want to celebrate you as a dad,
right.
And we have the kids. And so that's kind of a new joy that's been brought in. But I've had thoughts in my own mind of like, well, I don't want to bring you down on this day. And I don't want to not make this day about you because it is. But of course I miss my dad. Yeah. And I do want to talk about my dad. And I've literally said to my Chris, I want to talk about my dad on Father's Day. I've made that super clear. Like, I want you to ask about him. I want to raise a glass and toast to him at night, even if it is kind of a sad moment, because I don't want to forget him. At the same time, I don't want to be, again, a bummer on the day. But like, I love what you said, Chris Taylor, about the space for all the different emotions.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my story, when I was about a year old, my dad walked out on our family and just kind of disappeared off the face of the earth. So for, 30 years of my life, Father's Day was a foreign concept. People would celebrate it. And all it really meant to me when I was a teenager was my friends were busy doing something and I couldn't hang out with them. It was sort of an inconvenience, right?
Right.
It was like a really interesting experience. And then when I became a dad, I've got 2 kids, it was like this total flip where now there's like this energy coming at me for Father's Day. And it's like, whoa, like, what do I do with that?
Interesting.
So it's an interesting, sort of 180 and like, sort of you have this absent, sort of experience, and then all of a sudden you're thrust into sort of the spotlight of it. So, obviously that's a lot different than sort of navigating, the grief of it.
But that dichotomy is interesting for someone who it was almost something
like never a thing,
something you lamented
yeah.
and probably was like, oh, please go by. And now you being a dad. How old are your kids?
So they're almost 11 and almost 9. So
okay, yeah. So you're in this, and it's that's a great stage of life. And so to have that moment now where you want them to be present, and maybe it just gives you better perspective on what you want from it and what you want.
I think so. And it's just those mornings of Father's Day, you get love bombed, right? It's like they just jump on you and mob you, and it's like cards and this and that. It's like, oh my gosh, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? And then they always ask, like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I really want to just kind of be by myself and like sit in some quiet, but it's like the energy of what everybody else wants from you, you know?
Can I say, I just want to go watch the US Open and disappear for 6 hours?
Exactly.
Now what I really want to do is take you guys to the park, take you to get ice cream, and then barbecue for you tonight. That's what I really wanted to do.
And then separate the bickering about 20 times in between all of that. Right?
Father's Day is not during the school year, so you don't get the cute things that all the teachers make you, put together for your moms and dad. The moms kind of get, like, talk about love bomb. Moms get really love bomb. Then Father's Day is kind of like, oh yeah, it's in the middle of June. What do you want to do?
Well, it's funny you said that. Just as a side, I was watching a reel or something. There was a comedian, and apologize for quoting him but not knowing who the comedian was. But he was talking about how Father's Day was the 20th most celebrated holiday in the United States, and Mother's Day is the 2nd after Christmas. And he was like, I can't even think of 19 other holidays.
Right.
And you're like, yeah, like what, like Canadian Boxing Day is like,
are we behind the groundhog? Are we losing to Puxatawny Phil? Damn it.
I mean, I know as a person, I'm far less interesting than a groundhog. So I'll take the L on that.
You wake up with a sore. This is not a first. That's promo code
from beautiful Taylor Falls.
Visible fence system.
And get you exclusive discounts on entertainment.
Yeah, whatever it is. One thing that Lauren has taught me, and I think this would go to a dad who walked out on his family, abusive dad, whatever it is, it's being cognizant of that. As a friend, if you know somebody, what is your advice to people to, take that, just reach out on Father's Day, or just maybe just this whole week, reach out, just know, hey, I'm thinking about you, and however you want to do this, I'm with you.
Yeah, I think, if you knew the dad, I think it's just maybe reaching out and sharing a story. Hey, I was thinking about your dad today. And I remember, this conversation I had with him, or this thing that he taught me, or this really cool experience we had together. And I think that just gives permission for the other person to lean in and say, like, it's okay to share back. And if you kind of lean in and share something positive, you do create a little bit more of a positive energy about it. So there can be that more uplifting sharing rather than the sadness of the loss and just kind of sitting in the grief. Although I think sometimes when that grief gets triggered again, it is kind of sitting with people and being like, hey, it's okay. It's okay to feel that loss and sit in the sadness for a little while. But sometimes I think asking too, like, what is it that we can do together to kind of just honor your dad in this moment? Or, is there anything that he really enjoyed that we could go out and do together to this, for this day, like golfing or, going and catching a certain movie or listening to some live music or something.
Chris, I love what you just said about making it an uplifting share, because I hate to, and I don't want to put this pressure on people, but it's interesting. Sometimes when people text me, and again, I know their heart's in the right place, but like, my friends will sometimes text me on like the anniversary of my losing my dad. And what's interesting is how much that's changed for me over the years. In the first few years, I really appreciated that they did it. But now I've been able to like forget that day a little bit more. And I actually need to tell them, hey, now when you text me on it, you just like remind me, oh, dear, like I'm glad that I forgot that day. So now it's sort of, oh, now that was just a reminder. This was a horrible day. But like making it an uplifting, like, hey, you know, God, I always think of your dad when I see this thing, or remember when your dad did this. That's such a good way to start it from a positive note.
Yeah, because like you said, it just pushes you in the grief, right? Then you just have to kind of sit in it. It activates all that emotion. You know, some of it's obviously going to be unresolved. And then what do you do with that? Then that can corrupt sort of the rest of the day. And you're just thinking, gosh, I just wanted to celebrate Chris Harrison as a dad. And now I'm just kind of sad in the corner thinking of like, great, thanks friends for being good friends, but maybe not knowing the best way to support. And, you know, I think sometimes, you know, in anticipation of those moments, right, maybe a month or two before when things are kind of calm and the emotion is low, you know, just establishing some boundaries with those friends and just reaching out and saying like, hey, you know, I know you love to text me on that day. I'm really trying to kind of like recreate an experience on that day of something that's not as sort of sad or not as a constant reminder. And I love you guys for loving me in the way that you do, but I really need to be loved on that day in this way, and really kind of like being able to create that roadmap for them.
Well, I could see it. I was, you know, when I hear your story again, I think I thought of all these scenarios, and then I, you know, hear your story and I think, wow, that really would be a lot. And I think it's maybe important to have that, you know, that talk with your spouse, with the mom of like, hey, this is a bittersweet day for me. Like, yeah, you know, when the kids love bomb me and they give me the letters and the bad tie, like that's all great. But just know there's also a melancholy side to this to me. And like, I might kind of go in and out today. So just, you know, letting them be aware of like, this is also a weird day for me, but I'm also excited if that makes sense to you. You know, it's like, I think having that talk and giving yourself that grace to feel all those things is important.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I've learned so much through the years as a therapist, too. I mean, the influence of trauma in these relationships, right? I think you touched on it earlier, just an abusive dad situation where the word dad can activate, you know, sort of PTSD-like responses. And so it can actually be really emotionally destabilizing for people. But, you know, I also think of, you know, the dads that aren't the dads that kind of became the dads, the sort of the fill-ins, right? You know, the stepdads, but, you know, also these people that are out there that just see the kid that's like with the single mom and they just step in and they're like, you know, I'm going to be, you know, sort of this role for you. And those kids don't necessarily have like a Father's Day. And I think giving permission, maybe there even just needs to be like a separate day for those like, you know, sort of caretaker men that come in and just are supportive. Because I know my wife had that experience with when she was young. Her dad was kind of in and out, and she had a guy that was like, "Hey, hop in the car. We're going to go to the roller rink. We're going to listen to music." He was really close to her mom, and that really, I think, became, you know, what was dad for her. But she could never really reach out to him on Father's Day and say like, "Hey, Dad," because it would be sort of weird. But and so as she's gotten older, we've had conversations about like, maybe you should honor that relationship a little bit more in a dad kind of way. But again, another layer of like, gosh, nothing's as simple as we'd like it to be, you know,
not as black and white as it used to be. And you bring up a good point. And I do want, if nothing else from Father's Day, like you said, and it's not just dads, it's not just fathers, it's just good, strong men who are good leaders, good communicators. They look out for others. They've maybe taken on a role that they weren't asked for, of just helping, you know, kids grow up to be better humans. And whether that was your coach, a professor, it could be, you know, a priest, a rabbi, a lot of good men stand up in those roles. And I do think this is a good celebration of all of that. And because a lot of people take on those roles, that you're right. And they're not exactly the quote unquote dad.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's that strong male presence. You know, I mean, I was listening to somebody the other day talking, and I've heard this through the years, but it's like, you know, they're like, well, I took my kids to the park, right? It's like, that's not an accomplishment. That's just being a parent, right? That's like, you know.
Or the dad that's like, I'm babysitting the kids tonight. It's like, no, they're yours.
Yeah, you're the dad. That's you're the responsibility you took on. Yeah. But there's those dads out there that are just those super dads that like
Yeah.
never a complaint, will do everything and anything, and set sort of that role model for, I think, what we should all strive to be. And I think, for those, and maybe this speaks a little bit more to your experience with your dad, to really reach out and just, at whatever age you are, really love bomb them, in a healthy way, to just say like, as I've gotten older and reflect back on my childhood, gosh, like you were an amazing dad. Like I look in the world now and I see, the loss and the sadness and so much that isn't. And I just think, wow, how much I actually had. And those are really powerful moments.
Chris, you've said so much that's going to stick with me. I think the biggest thing is just like all the different, because we grow up and you see the commercials and you see the greeting cards. And on the one hand, that is great. But what we're really celebrating is the goal, like the goal of like a man, being a great father to his kids. But often that is like, but what that doesn't do is acknowledge all the steps towards that goal, like the journey that everybody's on to find that person, or maybe you don't have that person and maybe you'll become that person. So I love I love Father's Day and that it celebrates that, but just being aware that not everybody has that. I mean, one thing I want to ask, if I can steal a little of your therapy for a minute, is, like I said, I'm so far out from this, but if you know somebody who maybe they just lost their dad, they're kind of fresher in the trauma, or maybe you've just learned that someone is like yourself. And like I just learned that you grew up without a dad. What do you advise to those people who are really fresh in their trauma? Or what do you advise to someone who like you've just learned that your friend's gone through something and how you can support them now?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, grief is just such a powerful emotion. I think the first thing is not assuming that you know what somebody else is going through. Or what stage they're at in grief, because they might be in that super angry stage and you're coming in with that attuning to the sadness approach and they're just like, I don't want any part of that. So sometimes it's just asking permission, even like, hey, is it okay if I just kind of bring something up, or I just wanted to mention to you that I'm here for you. And I don't really know what you need, but if you do need anything, like I'm here. Because, when we experience loss, all you hear is this sort of, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss. Right. My condolences. And I think we all know, like, yeah, that's a courtesy, but it's like, what does that even mean? You're like, okay, am I even sorry right now? I don't even know what I feel. I'm like so in the throes of this just mixing pot, of emotion, that when I think of like a singular emotion, it just sort of doesn't compute. So I think just asking permission, leaning in, sort of exploring where they're at first before making any sort of assumptions of the type of support they might need. I think when people are sort of in that, early stages, it's just time spent with people that means the most. So I'm always just like, hey, I'm going to go pick up my friend. I'm going to say, hey, we're going out to grab a cup of coffee, or we're just going to go for a walk in the park. You don't even need to talk. I just want to be around you. Yeah. And it's not even about the grief, right? It's just about the human connection, to be present with them, to say, you're loved. I don't know what you're going through. I'm not going to attempt to understand. But then when you're in presence with somebody, I think generally people will go to a place where they'll start talking about the things that they need to talk about.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so much for your time. I think it was really important to have this show today. And, I want to celebrate dads, but I also want to let everybody know that we these holidays are so nuanced, and there's such a wide spectrum of how we need to approach these days. So I truly appreciate the knowledge and the expertise.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
And happy Father's Day to you. I
hope
you...
as to you, and Lauren, try not to bring it down too much for Chris. He does buy the ice cream and take the kids to the park, so he's reached the bar.
It's always a working Father's Day for him. I try to do something for him, and I'm like, "What do you want to do?" And he's like, "I want to grill steaks and watch golf." So I end up getting a great, relaxing day on Father's Day. Honestly,
everybody wins.
Appreciate it, Chris.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Chris.
Right. Take care, guys.
My thanks to Chris, and LZ, thank you for coming on. I really wanted to get your perspective on all this, and Father's Day. And this week, I think a lot about my dad. Happy Father's Day, Steve Harrison. And I think a lot about your dad. And I'm grateful for, the dad he was, and the kids that he left, and the work he did before he left us. And so happy Father's Day to Gary Zima as well. Our love.
Yes. And thank you for doing this. It meant a lot to me that you wanted to do this episode of the podcast. And I see how much you've taken in what I've said over the years. Sending all of our love to anybody who is having, that type of day where it's not necessarily the grilling and golfing and happy all day, whether you had a dad who disappointed you, or you never had a dad at all, or you had a dad you loved and lost, or you had a dad who you hated and lost, or who made you sad and lost. There's so many different types of father experiences that we all have. And this day, I hope, encompasses all of them in moments of reflection, in moments of joy, in moments of welcoming all of the emotions that we all have. We're sending our love and support to you.
Love you guys. Happy Father's Day. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening.